Vladimir actually plays quite similarly to the old Vladimir. The playstyle of Vladimir being like this tanky mage with some interesting mechanics has been really kept intact almost completely, and you can really see that in a lot of the design of his newer abilities. However, it has created some new strengths and new weaknesses, and it does allow him to be a little bit more dynamic overall too. So first off, his abilities. Now as I mentioned, his passive and his sanguine pool as W have been pretty much unchanged. You still get health based off of your ability power and ability power based off of your health as the passive, and he still has the W active to make himself untargetable and deal damage over time while slowing opponents. Both of those things are super cool and a big part of what defines Vladimir's playstyle, so I'm glad they were kept intact. His Q now works off of kind of like a resource system. When you cast it once, it stores a charge, and when you cast it a second time, you start to gain a buff called Crimson Rush that makes your next transfusion cast deal massively increased damage and heal for a massively increased amount. And the buff also grants you bonus movement speed to help you get in range for that third Q. This third empowered Q has a window of just a handful of seconds to cast before the Crimson Rush buff expires, but that empowered Q is on the level of about 3 individual Qs combined, and plus you get the bonus movement speed to help get in range. His normal Q for the first and second stack are a little bit weaker than his Q currently is now though, but that third Q, oh man, it's just an insane tool. And it was designed that way to give Vladimir like this mechanic that really revolves around this idea of having a window of opportunity. Although the first and second Q are a little bit weaker now, if you're able to make use of that third Q, you just get this huge payoff of harass, but it's also heavily telegraphed to your opponent and they can avoid it by maybe trying to get out of range or playing very defensively for a few seconds. It's pretty interesting design that's actually really interactive, but it also makes his early game loads stronger now since he has the potential to be an insane bully right from level 1, whereas previously he was maybe a little bit weak until his first or second back and picking up some spell vamp. In most matchups, maxing Q is probably going to be the way to go as the ability is quite powerful, and that third Q is just a totally awesome tool that allows you to dominate a lot of different lane matchups. His E now charges up and then casts out in an area of effect radius upon release. It costs health in proportion to how long you charge it for, and then deals damage on how long you charge it for as well. When it reaches full charge, it slows Vladimir for a split second when you're still holding it, and if you land a fully charged E on someone, it slows them for a little bit. Assuming you have equal points into the abilities, a fully charged E does about as much damage as the third Q proc on a target actually. I guess it's a little bit more like 80% of the damage that a third Q proc would deal, but on a shorter cooldown since you don't have to cast the Q twice before and then wait to finally get that third proc, so it definitely does a lot of damage. And what's cool is that you can cast your W while charging your E as long as you start charging it first. And you can also cast summoners like Flash while charging as well, and it's not going to interrupt it. The only thing that will interrupt the charging of your E is if your opponent uses hard crowd control on you, or if you just manually cancel it. And the damage is just really high. It's high enough to where maxing E first will definitely be viable in certain types of matchups. And I found it to be a solid option if you're maybe in an easy lane, or maybe in a lane where you already have a solid lead. The caveat though is that although his E releases in kind of like a Nova outwards from him, it can actually be blocked now by units, kind of like an Ashe volley might. Say for example there's one minion next to you and then there's another minion behind it, the E will only hit the minion in front of you, it's not going to hit the one behind it, and that can be a little bit tricky to deal with sometimes. It certainly makes his wave clear a lot worse, but it also makes the ability a lot more fair to the opponents, and as a result it's allowed to deal more damage because of that, and the delay on it too. But his wave clear has gotten a little bit worse overall. Even though his E still does more damage on demand, it's difficult to position it to land it on the full creep wave most of the time. His wave clear is still pretty solid though for sure, don't get me wrong, and it's certainly more than enough. His ultimate is pretty much the same effect, the only difference is that it now heals Vladimir for 50% of the damage dealt from the ultimate overall. So if you hit maybe like 4 or 5 targets with it in a team fight, you're probably healing for like 800, maybe 1000 health, maybe even more. It's a really awesome addition that makes landing Vladimir's ultimate on multiple targets a lot more rewarding and satisfying, which is a really nice addition considering his ultimate would often feel a little bit underwhelming before. It also makes it a lot better in 1v1 scenarios in long drawn out fights because of the heal, and it's another strength that is super powerful versus bruisers and tanks in lane. Overall, Vladimir has had his wave clear go down by a little bit, and his laning phase sustain has gone down a tiny bit as well, not that much though. The exchange is that his teamfight utility is a lot higher, and most importantly his early game power has skyrocketed. The power of that third Q harass is just insane. At level 1, it's hitting people for like 150 damage, maybe even more, and it keeps the same level of power for the entire laning phase. Vlad has become a huge lane bully now right from level 1, but since his E does slow him upon casting, he's still quite short ranged. In the top lane, he's getting loads of good matchups that work out quite well, but in the mid lane, it can be a little bit of a struggle versus harass heavy mages that outrange you. The new mechanics on his abilities are really cool, but also really fair for the opponents. So although he is a lot stronger in the early laning phase, there's still a lot of room for the opponents to get a fair fighting chance, so it's actually pretty sweet. His team fighting also feels a lot better as well, since he has an extra area of effect slow on his fully charged E now, and the combo of his ultimate plus the fully charged E and that third Q proc and then maybe your W is honestly enough to reliably one-shot squishy targets. You don't even have to be that far ahead. So his damage overall and his entire combo has gone up a little bit, and the sustained tanking from his ultimate in team fights is just awesome. His wave clear going down potentially makes him a bit worse in the mid lane though, especially since a lot of high range poke mages are getting buffs with this mage update. But overall, his Vlad rework has showed a lot of potential in my time playing him, and dominating the early laning was super fun, and overall he felt quite powerful. Most importantly though, this Vladimir rework is honestly really what a champion rework should be like. His core mechanics that defined his playstyle were unchanged, and the abilities that were changed received a lot of changes to improve their design and just add in extra healthy gameplay elements, but they still feel the same to play with. It really feels like Vladimir was just given a total facelift, and it really does still feel like Vladimir. It's incredibly well designed, and it's hard to find fault with the design decisions that they chose to take with this new Vladimir. If you were a Vlad main before, I can almost guarantee you that you will not hate this rework at all. In fact, you'll probably love it. And for those who weren't, he's definitely going to still be pretty fun to mess around with. I had a lot of fun with him, and in the version that I played him on the PBE, he seemed to have a lot of potential, and his new mechanics were interesting to work with. So if you liked what you saw of Vladimir in this video, definitely give him a shot once he hits the live servers on patch 6.9, which should be out in probably 2 weeks from the day